This is the long, chilling chronicle of America's lost icons. The stories of the men and women who thought they could change the world, and the quiet, often obsessed individuals who thought they could stop them forever. Number 10. The First Shockwave, Medgar Evers, June 12, 1963. We begin in the darkness before the storm, in a place where systemic hatred was not covert but codified in law. Jackson, Mississippi, 1963. Before the nation reeled from the loss of a president, the civil rights movement absorbed a more focused, brutal blow. Medgar Evers was a veteran of World War II, a man who risked his life for democracy abroad, only to return home and find himself denied a vote, a decent education, or even respect. As the field secretary for the NAACP, he was a living, breathing symbol of resistance in the Deep South. He was an organizer, a motivator, and to the segregationist powers, a dangerous liability. The threats were a part of his daily life. His family knew the danger. Every shadow was watched. Every noise was scrutinized. On the night of June 12, 1963, Evers was driving home from a late meeting. He was carrying a box of Jim Crow Must Go t-shirts. He pulled into his own driveway just after midnight. As he stepped out of his car, a shot tore through the humid Mississippi air. The bullet, fired from an Enfield rifle concealed in a honeysuckle thicket across the street, slammed into his back. He staggered. He collapsed. His wife, Merle, and their children rushed out to find him bleeding, his papers scattered on the asphalt. Medgar Evers was pronounced dead an hour later. The killer was quickly identified: Byron DeLay Beckwith, a known white supremacist and Ku Klux Klan member. The evidence was overwhelming: his rifle, his fingerprints on the scope, and his public boasts of hatred. But this was Mississippi in 1963. Justice was color-coded. Despite the irrefutable evidence, two separate all-white juries deadlocked, resulting in mistrials. DeLay Beckwith walked free, shielded by the system he served. The message was clear: in the American South, you could execute a civil rights leader in his own front yard and walk away unpunished. It took 31 agonizing years, decades fueled by the relentless pressure of Merle Evers and dedicated prosecutors, for the case to be reopened. Finally, in 1994, DeLay Beckwith was convicted by a racially diverse jury. The assassination of Medgar Evers was the chilling opening act of America's political tragedy. It proved that freedom would not be granted peacefully. It would have to be purchased with blood. His death did not end the movement. It consecrated it. Number 8. The Day Innocents Died. John F. Kennedy, November 22, 1963. Just 5 months after the tragedy in Jackson, the seismic shock arrived. A wound so deep it felt like the nation's very heart had stopped beating. Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. The motorcade moved slowly through Dealey Plaza. President JFK was the emblem of a new America, young, powerful, and utterly optimistic. He represented the new frontier, a time when anything seemed possible. Then, at 12:30 p.m. Central Time, the sound of 3 rifle shots shattered the midday calm. The shots were fired from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. The president slumped forward, critically wounded. The motorcade sped away, leaving the crowds to scream in disbelief and horror. In a sequence of events so bizarre it immediately fueled suspicion, police arrested Lee Oswald Harvey, a troubled former Marine, as the lone gunman. 2 days later, as Oswald was being transferred through the police basement, the conspiracy theories began to write themselves. Live on national television, Dallas nightclub owner Jack Ruby stepped out of the crowd and fatally shot Oswald. The only link to the assassination, the only man who could explain his motive, was suddenly dawn, silenced by an individual claiming patriotism and grief. The official conclusion that Oswald acted alone was immediately rejected by a vast majority of the American public. The questions were overwhelming. Was it the Mafia, the CIA, Cuba, the Soviet Union, the magic bullet that defied physics, the man on the grassy knoll. The death of JFK was more than the loss of a president. It was the brutal, violent end of the post-war American illusion of safety and unity. It taught the country that even the most protected man in the world could be struck down in an instant, and that the truth might forever be hidden just out of reach. For millions, the date 11/22/63 became synonymous with the moment America lost its optimism. Number 8. The Prophet Silenced. Malcolm X, February 21, 1965. The political landscape continued to bleed. 2 years after Kennedy, the revolution was consuming its own. New York City, February 21, 1965. Malcolm X had once been the fiery, uncompromising voice of the Nation of Islam, but he had broken with the group. He had traveled the world, returned as El Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, and softened his stance toward the possibility of interracial cooperation, while remaining fiercely committed to black self-determination. But his public exposure of the corruption and hypocrisy within the nation earned him a lethal enemy. Death threats were now constant. Just days before, his home had been firebombed. He knew his life was forfeit. On this day, he stood at the podium of the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, preparing to address the Organization of Afro-American Unity. As he began his speech, a commotion erupted in the audience, a diversion. As his bodyguards rushed to contain it, 3 men stormed the stage. A single, devastating blast from a sawn-off shotgun, followed by pistol fire from the other 2 assailants. Malcolm X was struck 16 times. He was assassinated in front of 400 people, including his pregnant wife, Betty Shabazz, and his 4 daughters. The chaos was absolute. 3 men, all members of the Nation of Islam, were convicted, but questions surrounding the FBI and NYPD's role in the investigation and the withholding of crucial evidence persisted for decades. One of the convicted men, Mujahid Abdul Halim, Thomas Hagen, later maintained that 2 of the other men convicted were innocent, naming his true acolytes.
In a staggering development, the truth finally emerged. In 2021, after a decades-long fight and a review sparked by a documentary, 2 of the convicted men, Muhammad A. Aziz and Khalil Islam, were exonerated. Evidence proved that the FBI and NYPD had withheld information that supported their alibis. The assassination of Malcolm X was a tragedy compounded by betrayal and, tragically, a miscarriage of justice that took more than half a century to partially correct. It demonstrated the lethal consequences of challenging power, both from the outside and from within.
Number 7. The Dream Extinguished. Martin Luther King Jr., April 4, 1968. The year 1968 was a crucible for the American soul. The Vietnam War was tearing the country apart, and the civil rights movement was shifting its focus to the agonizing fight for economic equality. Memphis, Tennessee, April 4, 1968. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was in Memphis supporting striking sanitation workers. He was planning the Poor People's Campaign, an ambitious effort to march on Washington, D.C. He was tired, but his vision remained unshakable. In his final speech the night before, he had spoken with chilling prescience. "I've been to the mountaintop, and I've seen the promised land." At 6:01 p.m. the next evening, King stood on the second-floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel. He was joking with his aides below. Then, a shot rang out from a nearby rooming house bathroom window. The bullet, fired from a Remington rifle, struck him in the neck, killing him instantly. The voice of nonviolence, the man who had pleaded for peace and justice, was violently silenced. The country erupted. Riots consumed more than 100 cities, a visceral, anguished reaction to the death of the moral leader. The killer was identified as James Earl Ray, an escaped convict and petty criminal. Ray was captured 2 months later in London. He initially pleaded guilty, but soon recanted, claiming he was set up by a mysterious figure named Raoul. For decades, the King family and many researchers have refused to accept the lone gunman theory. They alleged a conspiracy involving government elements and organized crime. In 1999, the King family won a civil lawsuit against a man named Lloyd Jowers and other unknown co-conspirators, concluding that King was the victim of a government conspiracy. The U.S. Department of Justice investigated, but ultimately stood by the official conclusion that Ray was the primary shooter. Whether driven by a conspiracy or a lone racist, the outcome was the same. The dream was cut short. Dr. King's assassination left a permanent scar, robbing the nation of the man most equipped to heal its racial and economic divides. Number 6. The Final Hope, Robert F. Kennedy, June 5, 1968. The shock of King's death was still raw when, just 62 days later, the tragedy repeated itself. The hopes of the disillusioned nation had transferred to one man, Senator Robert F. Kennedy. He was the keeper of his brother's legacy, a man speaking powerfully to the anti-war movement and to the economically disadvantaged. He offered a light in the suffocating darkness of 1968. Late on the night of June 4, 1968, Kennedy won the crucial California Democratic primary. The celebratory atmosphere at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles was delirious. He left the podium with a famous parting line, "On to Chicago and let's win there." As he moved through a crowded kitchen pantry to a waiting press conference, a young man named Sirhan Sirhan, a Palestinian immigrant, stepped forward. Sirhan, motivated by Kennedy's recent support for the sale of military jets to Israel, fired a .22 caliber revolver. Kennedy was shot 3 times. 5 bystanders were also wounded. Juan Romero, a 17-year-old busboy who had just shaken Kennedy's hand, cradled the senator's head, placing a rosary in his hand. For 25 agonizing hours, the country watched as doctors fought to save the last viable symbol of the Kennedy promise. He died on June 6, 1968. The assassination of RFK felt like the absolute, final, cruel end to the idealism of the 1960s. The nation had been struck down twice, silencing the most powerful voices for social justice and peace. Sirhan Sirhan was convicted, a man whose notebooks revealed the murderous mantra, "RFK must die." While there are ongoing debates about whether a second shooter was involved, the overwhelming consensus holds Sirhan responsible for the premeditated act. After June 1968, America changed. Hope retreated, replaced by a deep generational cynicism about the ability of politics to enact true, peaceful change. Number 5. The Voice of Peace, John Lennon, December 8, 1980. The violence of the 60s and 70s eventually gave way to the anxieties of the 80s, shifting the focus from political figures to cultural icons. New York City, December 8, 1980. John Lennon, the former Beatle, was more than a musician. He was the global voice of peace, idealism, and counterculture. After years of privacy, he had returned to the public eye with renewed energy, working with his wife Yoko Ono on their double fantasy album. Earlier that evening, as he left the Dakota apartment building, he signed an album for a devoted fan waiting outside, Mark David Chapman. Hours later, Lennon and Ono returned home. Chapman was waiting. As Lennon walked past him toward the archway entrance, Chapman called out his name. He dropped into a combat stance and fired 5 hollow-point bullets from a .38 caliber revolver. 4 struck Lennon. Lennon stumbled, cried out, and collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital, but was pronounced dead on arrival. Chapman didn't run. He stood calmly at the scene, reading a copy of J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. He saw himself as the novel's protagonist, Holden Caulfield, a phony killer driven by a delusional fury over Lennon's wealth and statements he perceived as hypocritical, specifically citing the line in the song Imagine to imagine no possessions. This was not a political hit. This was a tragedy born of obsessional celebrity worship, profound psychological disturbance, and a desperate desire for notoriety. Lennon's death was a cultural devastation. It proved that the darkness was no longer confined to the realms of politics and racial struggle.
It could target the purest voice of peace and love. The world lost its most iconic musical dreamer to the quiet, festering resentment of a stranger. Number 4. The Siren's Silence. Selena Quintanilla, March 31, 1995. 15 years later, another star, a rising icon who symbolized hope and cultural crossover, was brought down by a different kind of obsession: betrayal. Corpus Christi, Texas, March 31, 1995. Selena Quintanilla was the undisputed queen of Tejano music, a young powerhouse poised to become one of the biggest Latin American stars in the world. Her success extended beyond music. She was a fashion designer and businesswoman. She trusted Yolanda Salvador, a woman who started as a devoted fan and became the president of her fan club and manager of her boutiques.
But Saldivar's devotion was a mask for deep-seated obsession and greed. Selena's family discovered Saldivar had been systematically embezzling tens of thousands of dollars from both organizations. Selena agreed to meet Saldivar at the Days Inn motel to retrieve the final financial records. During a tense confrontation in the motel room, Saldivar pulled a .38 caliber revolver she had purchased days earlier. As Selena attempted to leave the room, Saldivar fired one shot into her back. Severely wounded, Selena staggered to the lobby, collapsing on the floor, but managing to point to the retreating figure and utter the name of her attacker, Yolanda Saldivar. Selena died shortly after at the hospital due to massive blood loss. Saldivar claimed the gun fired accidentally during a struggle over suicide, but the prosecution proved the act was intentional, driven by the desperation of a woman about to lose everything she had stolen and everything she was pathologically attached to. Yolanda Saldivar was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The senseless murder, rooted in a twisted sense of possessiveness, created a cultural void that continues to echo in the Latin music community to this day. It was a tragic reminder that often, the most destructive forces are those we invite into our closest circles of trust. Number 3. The Unsolved Shadow. Tupac Shakur, September 7, 1996. The violence that defined the 1960s was driven by ideology. The violence of the 1990s was driven by the darker side of fame and rivalry. Las Vegas, Nevada, September 7, 1996. Tupac Shakur was a contradiction, a brilliant poet, and a troubled, aggressive figure who stood at the absolute center of the explosive East Coast versus West Coast hip-hop feud. He was complex, volatile, and immensely influential. On this night, he and Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight were riding in a black BMW heading to a nightclub after attending a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. At a red light on the Las Vegas Strip, a white Cadillac pulled alongside their car. Gunshots erupted. Tupac was hit multiple times, including a critical shot to the lung. He was rushed to the hospital. For 6 days, the world watched, waiting for the miracle that never came. He died on September 13, 1996, at the age of 25. For decades, the case remained shrouded in darkness. Witnesses were silent, evidence was scarce, and theories ran rampant involving rival gangs, rival rappers, and even those closest to him. It became the most famous unsolved cultural murder of a generation. But the silence was finally broken. In 2023, a dramatic breakthrough occurred when police arrested Dwayne, Keffa D, a known gang figure who had openly boasted of his involvement in the drive-by, claiming he was in the car when the shots were fired. The fact that it took 27 years to make an arrest underscores the profound, insular challenges of solving crimes rooted in gang retaliation and the fear of street code. Tupac's death was a cataclysm for the music industry, transforming a living legend into an immortal martyr. He remains the tragic symbol of genius destroyed by the environment it was forced to fight. Number 2. The Final Obsession. Gianni Versace, July 15, 1997. Less than a year after Tupac's death, the final bizarre act of this dark era unfolded, proving that neither great wealth nor fortress-like walls could protect against a determined killer. Miami Beach, Florida, July 15, 1997. Gianni Versace was a global fashion titan. His name was synonymous with modern luxury. his designs defining the jet-set era. He lived a life of staggering opulence at his Casa Casarian mansion on Ocean Drive. That morning, Versace returned home after a quick walk to a local cafe for a newspaper. As he reached his front gate, he was approached by Andreas Cunanan, a 27-year-old serial killer who had been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list for murdering 4 other men across the country. Cunanan had been stalking the Miami area. His motives a toxic mix of grandiosity, resentment, and obsession with fame. He fired 2 shots into the back of Versace's head at point-blank range. The murder of a global celebrity on the steps of his majestic home in daylight hours was an act of cold, theatrical malice designed to achieve maximum notoriety. The manhunt ended 8 days later when Cunanan, cornered by police, committed suicide in a homeboat nearby, using the same gun that killed the designer. His suicide sealed the motive forever in speculation. Did they know each other? Was it a random selection based on fame? Was it the final desperate act of a collapsing mind? The murder of Gianni Versace was the final, haunting question mark of this period of assassinations. It showed that the dark psychological forces unleashed on the American psyche knew no boundary, not race, not ideology, and certainly not wealth.
Honorable mention Charlie Kirk, building a conservative youth movement. At just 18 years old, Charlie Kirk did something remarkable. He founded Turning Point USA in 2012, a conservative student movement dedicated to promoting principles of free markets and limited government. What started as a teenage activist vision grew into something unprecedented. Under Kirk's leadership, Turning Point USA expanded to over 3,500 high school and college campuses nationwide, becoming a well-funded media operation backed by conservative megadonors. Kirk pioneered a new model of political engagement. He organized mass rallies drawing tens of thousands of young voters annually, featuring top conservative leaders including President Trump, with stadium concert-style production complete with massive screens and pyrotechnics. Kirk merged multi-platform media commentary with in-person gatherings and get-out-the-vote drives, hosting The Charlie Kirk Show and publishing multiple books. He became one of the most prominent voices of the MAGA movement within the Republican Party. His activism extended beyond politics. Kirk incorporated Blexit into Turning Point USA in 2023, working to broaden the GOP's reach among black voters. Kirk transformed campus conservatism into a national force, shaping a generation's political engagement. On September 10, 2025, Kirk was assassinated while speaking at a TPUSA public debate event on the Utah Valley University campus. His death sparked international attention and the subsequent condemnation of political violence by prominent domestic and international figures, as well as partisan rancor and recriminations. We have journeyed through 9 lives tragically cut short, 9 icons whose assassinations altered the course of history and culture. But as you've listened, you may have been counting. You may have noticed one name, one seismic event that is conspicuously missing from our list. A legend whose sudden death fits the pattern of fame, tragedy, and enduring mystery. We left that spot open, the crucial 10th spot, because we want to hear your guess. Which icon is missing from our list? Who is the 10th American figure whose assassination belongs in this chilling chronicle? Drop your answer in the comments below. If you think you know the name we missed, and if you want to continue exploring the hidden truths behind the world's most dramatic events, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next documentary. Head to the comments now. We'll be there to check who guessed right.